We are just a few weekends away from the college football season kicking off. Here are some updates from the Big 10 fall camp reports. Before we go through and talk about practically every Big 10 school that I was able to find practice notes on over the past couple weeks, please hit the like and subscribe button if you like what we are doing here at Campus to Canton. We are trying to continue to grow the college football game and the college fantasy football game, and we are getting so close to the start of the season. So kicking it off with Indiana. Running back Justice Ellison is getting a lot of love out of camp. He's kind of been the talk of the camp in this kind of Kurt Cinetti offense. There's been a lot of love for him. Not really much from the quarterback position. Does seem like Curtis Rourke is going to be the starter, but there's not really been a lot of talk about him. But wide receivers Elijah Surratt, who followed that coaching staff from James Madison, and Miles Price, the transfer from Texas Tech, have been turning heads, quote unquote. So those have been the two wide receivers most talked about throughout the past couple days of camp. Moving over to Iowa. Cade McNamara has apparently really struggled at passing downfield and even has actually struggled in the shorter passes as well. Brennan Sullivan has looked better, but has still had some issues with incompletions and penalties. It looks like, as of right now, according to the reports, that they're still going to go with Cade McNamara to start the season. But from all the reports, it says that McNamara looks like a guy who has not been able to play football in a while. And it's probably the reason why they went out and got Brennan Sullivan. Sounds like to me, while Cade McNamara may start the season, he may have a very, very short leash in being the quarterback for the Iowa offense. More interestingly, Caleb Johnson, the starting running back for Iowa, is a guy that we all think could have a really big year. And even the reports in camp are saying that. However, they are saying that Leshan Williams and Kamari Moulton will be splitting carries and will actually get some work here as well. The coaching staff is talking those two up and saying that they will get run in these games and they're going to be a big part of this offense moving forward. So I still expect Caleb Johnson to be the lead back and probably getting the majority of the carries, but it sounds like they want to work these other two guys in. Iowa is using Jacob Gill as their speedy wide receiver. He has been a standout in camp, but it is Caleb Brown and Seth Anderson who are going to be the main options of this passing attack from the wide receiver position. But again, they've really liked using Jacob Gill and his speed. Apparently hasn't unfortunately been quite a big deep threat because, as I mentioned at the beginning there, Cade McNamara and Brendan Sullivan have both kind of struggled passing down the field. Moving over to Maryland, reports are that it is still an open battle between MJ Morris and Billy Edwards. However, it does seem like from the practices and some of the things that the coaches have been saying that they might actually be leaning toward Billy Edwards. He has been the more consistent over the past few practices and Saturday scrimmage, and they have both split times with the ones equally. So it still has not been confirmed, but a lot of people obviously expected MJ Morris, who transferred in from NC State, to kind of take this job. Sounds like Billy Edwards is really pushing him and could possibly be the starter. Like I said, reports are that he has been the most consistent. We know a lot of coaching staffs look for that. Third-year receiver Shalik Knotts has been kind of emerging as a player who some expect to have a really big season, including second-year running back Nolan Ray as well. Both have been bust-out players this fall camp, and it seems like the Maryland coaching staff expects them to kind of be the guys. It does seem like Ty Felton and Caden Prather have kind of been the guys right now at wide receiver, but Knotts and even Octavian Smith have really been pushing them. More Knotts, though, than anybody else. He's really been a standout so far through this fall camp. So again, I don't know. Maryland hasn't really had a wide receiver over the past couple of years, probably since Dante Demas, who, unfortunately in that season 2 went down with an injury that we've really wanted from a fantasy perspective. But it does sound like Knotts is really kind of taking that step forward and a guy at least to be paying attention to. Moving on over to Michigan State, it really seems like through these camp reports and scrimmages, like these positions are solidifying themselves so far. I mean, from everything I have read from the reports, the videos, and everything, it sounds like Aiden Childs has been nothing short of fantastic and is in for a very good season. Obviously, it's a lot of Michigan State reporters and everything reporting about this, but I mean, everything we've seen on Twitter, listening to podcasts, anything been put on YouTube, he's just been, like I said, nothing short of fantastic. So I'm expecting a big year from him. And he seems to be connecting really well with transfer tight end Jack Velling, who it sounds like could very easily lead this team in receiving. Velling has been by far, from everything I've read, kind of like the top standout with Aiden Childs. Excited to see how that works out with this offense. But he has just been an absolute rock star. Chris Moxley, part of our, founding group here at Campus to Canton, and someone on this network has been talking about a lot over the past couple weeks and months. So if you were able to grab him in your CFF drafts or underdog draft, you are likely loving life right now, because he seems to just really be a standout for the Spartans. Along with Nathan Carter, running back, transferred in. He seems to have locked up that starting back role, but more importantly, it seems like they are using him a lot in the receiving game. There's been a lot of dump-off passes to him, a lot of them lining him up in the slot and using him that way. So could be a very interesting running back for fantasy purposes. And it does seem like the most consistent wide receivers so far with the ones have been Montour Foster, Nick Marsh, and Jaron Glover. Those have been the ones who have been talked about the most and seem to kind of have stepped up as those one through multiple practices. So true freshman Nick Marsh might be getting out there. He was a guy I know they were talked a lot about throughout the recruiting process. Seemed like Aiden Childs really liked him as well. Sounds like he's solidifying his role with the ones. Again, I don't know if I really want anyone outside of Jack Velling, but those three have really seemed to kind of step up and make a name for themselves throughout camp so far. Moving over to Michigan, Alex Orji has continued to get a ton of praise, but not for his rushing. A lot of the players and coaches have been talking about his development as a passer and how he's kind of progressed as a passer so far this fall camp. I expect he's going to be the starter. I don't think it's going to be Jack Tuttle or any of those guys, but it is going to be interesting to watch. Obviously, from a Campus to Canton CFF perspective, we are looking at Alex Orji as more of like a fantasy option than any kind of real developmental NFL guy. But again, if you go in and look at the Campus to Canton athleticism tools, I mean, he's right up there with guys like Jalen Milroe. We saw how much fun he was to watch last year in the CFF asset he was. So if Alex Orji can do something like that, especially behind such an incredible offensive line like Michigan is likely going to have again, and possibly with the offense kind of staying the same with Sharon Moore calling it, depending on whatever happens with any possible suspensions and everything. So it could be a very interesting season, at least for Alex Orji. It does seem like Tyler Morris has stepped up to be the wide receiver one and has been targeted a lot in practice. He has been getting a lot of hype again. Right now, I think probably a watch list guy with what we don't know right now what Alex Orji is going to be as a passer, but he is getting a lot of love. There's been a lot of comparisons of him to Ronnie Bell throughout this fall camp. And it does seem like right now the 1-2 punch in the backfield is going to be Donovan Edwards and Khalil Mullings, with Mullings being kind of that physical guy and Edwards being the speed threat. But more importantly, it does seem like Jordan Marshall, the true freshman, has passed up Benjamin Hall on the running back depth chart with how productive he's been. Khalil Mullings and Donovan Edwards both giving him a lot of love. Again, Benjamin Hall, a guy from last year's spring game, was talked about as like the next guy in Michigan. There were a lot of us telling you guys to pump the brakes on that a little bit. All the other running backs were injured. Seems like Jordan Marshall's been the guy, which also probably spells bad news for anybody like myself who liked Cole Cabana last year. I mean, he's almost not being talked about at all. So it really seems like Khalil Mullings, Donovan Edwards, and then Jordan Marshall are kind of the guys. And there are talks that they think Jordan Marshall could be a guy who gets some run this year. Moving over to Minnesota. So starting quarterback Brosmer is out and has not been doing much in the practices, or has been doing some stuff in individual drills, but that's about it. So Drake Lindsay has been getting all of the snaps with the first team. Offensive coordinator Greg Harbaugh and Brosmer have been talking to him through a walkie-talkie, and he's been apparently like a mixed bag. Has got 3 straight sacks. And then by holding onto the ball too long, and then did throw some interceptions. However, after that, he really did turn it around, made a couple plays with his legs, did get the ball thrown out of bounds to avoid interceptions or sacks, and then actually did throw a couple big touchdown passes as well. There was a drop between Lindsay and they didn't say what running back went on a handoff, but the fumble, but Lindsay did get it back. So he's been up and down, but there's been a lot of reports about how positive he has also looked at times and has looked like a true freshman. It seems like Lindsay's going to be the guy behind Brosmer. I don't expect that to at all change throughout the season unless there's an injury, but the fact that he's getting all these reps with the ones is probably good for his development overall. Running back Darius Taylor and wide receiver Daniel Jackson are just getting a ton of love. We expect them to be the best players on this offense. Seems like all the reports are pointing to that as well. However, I did want to point out true freshman fame, and I don't honestly know how to say his last name. It might be LeBoy. I'm not sure. But he has been the one that they are talking about a lot behind Darius Taylor. He had a ton of impressive runs the other day. He even backed up people. There was multiple defenders trying to stack him up, and he drove him back for 10 yards. He's been able to get to the sidelines when he catches the corner on the defense, get to the sideline, and burn down the sideline with his speed, beating a lot of defenders and eliminating pursuit angles. So he might be a guy. I mean, we expect Darius Taylor to have a massive year this year, and maybe he'll come back after that, but could be NFL bound. So it seems like Fame might be the guy here to roster in this backfield behind him, and a guy that I don't think anybody is talking about with the reports of the speed that he's been using. Then obviously, again, being able to drag guys for 10 yards that were on him. That's the kind of back you want. And you want the Minnesota running back as well. So a very interesting name that I don't believe anybody's really talking about. Has gotten a lot of love through multiple practices now. Moving on over to Ohio State, it seems like a formality at this point that Will Howard is going to be the starter. It sounds like he's pretty much just run away with it after the first couple practices. Right now, it sounds like there's still a battle between Devin Brown and Julian Saint as who the backup is going to be. I personally, just from the things I've heard, expect it to be Devin Brown, but would not be surprised if Julian Saint is pushing that and possibly even takes over as the backup at some point in time during the season. Been saying it all offseason. Jeremiah Smith is locked in as a starter, and that's practically been confirmed throughout the past couple fall practices. It does seem like it is going to be him, Carnell Tate, and Emeka Egbuka locked in as the top three. However, the more interesting name for me, you got Jaden Ballard. I think Kojo Antwi was getting a lot of love earlier this offseason. But Brandon Innes seems to have locked himself into the fourth option here and has been talked about over the past couple practices really being promising as well. Obviously, if you subscribe to the year 1-0 theory, you're not really looking at him from an NFL perspective. But again, with likely Emeka Egbuka going off to the NFL after this season, Brandon Innes might be a very interesting name to at least watch. And I know a lot of people currently still have him on their rosters. Obviously, Travion Quinshon getting a lot of love, as is James Peoples. Talked about how impressive he has been. Again, I expect he's going to get some run. And Henderson and Judkins, who have both dealt with injuries throughout their college career, if either one of those guys go down, Peoples could be an interesting name. All three have just gotten a ton of love as well. Moving on over to Oregon. Not a lot. I mean, obviously, they've talked a lot about how great Dylan Gabriel's looked, Tez Johnson, Evan Stewart, who've both actually been returning kicks as well, which is interesting to me. But the name that has been brought up a ton by Will Stein and has actually introduced him as the most underrated player on the team and calls him Mr. Consistent has actually been running back Jaden Lamar. Talked about how much he loves moving him around the offense and actually using him as a receiving threat and a running back. We obviously expect Jordan James to be the leader here and be very good for this offense, but I was not expecting Jaden Lamar to be the guy that offensive coordinator Will Stein has just been raving about through multiple practices. Just a little side note here, Jerrion Dickey, who was a wide receiver we loved last year in hopes that he could do something, has been spotted in uniform, but in the practice the other day was not wearing cleats, participated in lighter workouts. Sounds like he could be dealing with another injury, unfortunately. Moving on over to Penn State, Tyler Warren getting a ton of love. Really the only, I know he's their tight end, but like probably the only receiving option that's gotten a lot of love here recently, but Quentin Martin has as well. By all accounts, he's been very highly hyped by the coaching staff, has looked really good in spring ball, and his size and body type stands out compared to the rest of the players in the room. Now, he has struggled a little bit apparently with that contact balance right now and is very upright running according to the reports, but it does seem like a really good fit for them and it gives them a player as the third option right now. I should say also that freshman receiver Josiah Brown has caught some eyes and has really turned some heads. The main talk has been about his acceleration and his wiggle in the open field. They're calling him a very slippery player. Last but not least on Penn State, it does seem like true freshman Ethan Grunkmeyer has been locked into the QB3 behind Prabula and Drew Allar at the number 1 spot. Jackson Smolik, who came in there last year, has been dealing with an injury and has been sidelined. And for the most part, sounds like Grunkmeyer has kind of passed him up. Moving over to Rutgers, really not much to report here outside of KJ Duff and Ben Black have just made a ton of plays at the wide receiver position. I don't know that we're looking for a Rutgers wide receiver, but at least those are the two that seem to be getting the most love and most talked about throughout the couple practices for Rutgers. UCLA. So they've had multiple practices. It had a big scrimmage on Saturday, and Ethan Garbers apparently had an excellent day. His accuracy and decision-making was incredible, and he even improved a couple times and has seemed to improve throughout the entire, from spring through this so far fall camp. Titus, man, I'm going to call him TMA because I don't know how to say his name. And Titus is the first name, has seemed to be the favorite target for Ethan Garbers. He goes to him early and often throughout the practices and in the scrimmage. Rico Flores continues to be the most sure-handed wide receiver, as all the other players like Devin Kirkwood, even J. Michael Sturdivant, have struggled with drops. So has TMA. Rico Flores has seemed to be the most consistent, but it seems to kind of be behind TMA as the favorite target for Ethan Garbers. J. Michael Sturdivant had a couple really nice catches and was able to fully extend himself in traffic, taking a big hit, but again, has struggled with some drops. At running back, it seems like TJ Harden, whatever issues were bothering him in the spring are behind him. He's looked incredible. Seems like Keegan Jones and Isaiah Carlson are the 2-3 here in the offense. Last but not least, the backup quarterback spot. So it does seem like Martin is the backup as of right now, but it does seem like Luke Duncan may be pushing him, who's strung together multiple strong practices and actually, according to the reports, looked like the best quarterback in the scrimmage with his arm velocity and accuracy. So something to watch in the battle between him, Duncan, and Martin for the QB2 spot behind Ethan Garbers. USC, not a ton of news from practices. Seems like Lincoln Riley's kind of been closing a lot of the practices to the press, but it does seem like Jaden is working as the 2, which we kind of expected, but has been looking good. Seems like the starting wide receivers for the most part have been Jacoby Lane, Zachariah Branch, and Mekhi Lemon. Zachariah Branch and Mekhi Lemon doing most of the kickoff and punt returns, so something to watch out for. Last 2 schools, Washington and Wisconsin. For Washington, Jonah Coleman set up as the starter for the running back, but it actually seems like Cameron Davis is the backup as of right now, and had a really good scrimmage on Saturday. Receivers Denzel Boston, Jeremiah Hunter, and Giles Jackson have been running with the ones in every single practice. Seems like those are the 3 that are locked in there. Denzel Boston seems to be having pretty good rapport with quarterback Will Rogers. Damon Williams has had some impressive moments throughout the camp practices and everything, but it does seem like the reports are that he's also looked like a true freshman. He's had a lot of freshman moments, but has also had some very exciting plays. You know, as I've said before, I do think there's a shot that he plays this year, but Will Rogers will be the starter. Moving on over to Wisconsin, here we go again. CJ Williams has been talked about a lot, coming down with a lot of big catches and touchdown catches, becoming this red zone threat for Tyler Van Dyke. Had a lot of over-the-shoulder catches and in traffic for around 15 yards. He's been a player that a lot of people have been talking about. On top of CJ Williams, wide receiver Chris Brooks has talked a lot about. He's been connecting with Braden Locke a lot, backup quarterback kind of in name as of right now. Will Pauling has been making some impressive catches and has just been very consistent, but wide receiver Chris Brooks has actually been the one they've talked the most about looking good. There have been a lot of reports that Tyler Van Dyke has been pulling away with this quarterback competition. I went through 5 practice notes, and not one of them has said that he's pulling away. He's definitely the leader in the pack, and he's had some good practices, but there have been reports that Braden Locke has had better days than him, and Tyler Van Dyke has really struggled, including in the scrimmage recently. Both kind of struggled, and neither one seemed to pull away. So I expect Tyler Van Dyke is going to win the job, but I don't know that I would believe that he's pulling away with it right now. It sounds like it's a pretty close battle between him and Braden Locke. That will do it for all of the fall camp practice report notes so far for the Big Ten. We'll be back here soon with SEC notes. Everybody, if you like what we're doing here at Campus to Camp, please hit that like and subscribe.